Welcome to episode 207 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show the public who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to hear from retired Special Agent in Charge Wayne Davis, who served in the FBI for 25 years. During his career, he was the head of the Indianapolis, the Detroit, and the Philadelphia field offices. SAC Wayne Davis was among the first group of fully qualified African American agents hired by the FBI and allowed to attend the FBI Academy in 1962 and 1963. In this episode, Wayne Davis provides a fascinating personal and historical account of diversity in the FBI, including his private meeting with Director J. Edgar Hoover in 1965. During that meeting, Director Hoover openly expressed his views about Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. Some of you may remember this episode. It was previously posted on April 23, 2016, as episode 14. I've updated the intro and outro, the audio quality, and the show notes. I'm reposting this episode because Wayne Davis passed away on July 10th, 2020. I'm heartbroken. Early in my career, he and his wife Lois, a former assistant United States attorney, mentored me. They helped me find my way as a special agent and as a working mother with a demanding job. I've talked in interviews about my struggles during the first 4 years of my career. During a low point, Wayne Davis called me to his office and asked me to be his applicant coordinator, even though I had less than 5 years in the Bureau. Wayne was serious about minority recruiting, and he thought I would do a good job for him. How he knew that, I don't know. But it was part of his job evaluation to hire more women and minorities, and he did not want to fail, and I did not want to let him down, and I didn't. Lois Davis called me a few days ago, before Wayne died, and let me tell him over the phone how much they both mean to me. Special Agent Wayne Davis was an even more special husband, special father, special grandfather, special boss, and special friend. May he rest in peace. This episode is a celebration of his remarkable life. Thank you for listening, and thank you for helping me honor Special Agent Wayne Davis. Now here's the show. Everyone, I am extremely excited to introduce my guest for today, former Special Agent in Charge of the Philadelphia Division, Wayne Davis. Wayne, and it's still hard for me to call you Wayne. I'm so used to calling you boss. But Wayne, welcome to the show.
No, listen, good to be here, Jerry, and feel free to call me whatever. Mr. Davis was my father, so Wayne is what I go by, so...
I would just want to give the listeners a little bit of a background. In 2008, the FBI celebrated their 100th anniversary, and in Philadelphia, we had this huge banquet. And for the banquet, I videotaped a number of retired agents so that I could show this video at the banquet, and you were one of them. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do, and it was fun.
Yes, but what was so exciting for me is that I knew that you were one of the early pioneers as far as African American agents in the Bureau, but I didn't know that you were within that first group. And then what was really exciting is that you told me a story about Hoover asking to meet you, and you described that meeting.
Yes, it was interesting. I did get in to meet him, and we had a nice chat, which was more of a monologue from the director. It wasn't much of a dialogue.
Well, just knowing that, this was a man, the director of the FBI, who resisted for so long in hiring African Americans as agents, and now here you are in front of him, talking to him, is just really fascinating, and I'm glad that we're going to get a chance to get into this a little bit deeper, to talk about Hoover's resistance, your acceptance, and, of course, what you found out much later in your career about the exchange between Hoover and Bobby Kennedy.
That's the interesting part. I think at least it was interesting to me when many years later I was able to access the files that showed the correspondence between Hoover's office and the Attorney General's office. That, I think, was the interesting part.
Let's start at the beginning, though, and begin talking about when you first became introduced to the possibility of becoming an agent.
Well, let me back up on that a bit. And Hoover was under a lot of pressure to diversify his special agent force. There were a lot of minorities in clerical, or what we call now, I guess they still call them support positions. Back in those days, we called them clerical positions. But the agent's staff was severely lacking. And Mr. Hoover really wasn't making any efforts to hire in that regard. Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General, and he made it very, very difficult for Hoover to not do what he wanted Hoover to do in the area of minority. He was attempting to diversify the ranks of the Department of Justice in general and the FBI in particular.
So are you saying that there were no minority special agents?
Exactly. No minority, fully qualified, school-trained special agents. There were about 5 or 6 or 7 individuals who, through length of service, carried special agent credentials, but they didn't really have the full qualifications that agents are required to have.
So did they have the college education?
No.
Did they go to the FBI Academy?
The answer is no, and I can name them. Jimmy Young worked 42. It's the 42 classification, the deserter cases. But Jimmy, when the director came to New York, Jimmy was his chauffeur. When the heat was on the director, he named Jimmy Young as a special agent, but the work that he did was very, very limited. There was another fellow in New York, Harold Karr, who got special agent credentials, again, because of long and loyal service.
Was it both long and loyal service and so that Hoover could just check that box and say...
Check that box. But Harold Karr stayed down in the basement of the building and kept the director's limousine polished. In Chicago, there was Carl Mason, the same story. Carl Mason did limited investigative work, no college education, and he drove the director should the director have to go to Chicago. Miami, the same story. Leo McLaren did the same job in Chicago. And in Los Angeles, it was the Striders, Jesse Strider and his son Bob. They did investigative work, but they pretty much drove the director when the director came out, maybe to go to the Trek at San Diego. But that was the extent pretty much of black special agents. Carried credentials, didn't have the full qualifications, but did what they had to do.
Did you ever have an opportunity to speak with them? How did they feel about the fact that they had these credentials, but really were not allowed to do what all the other special agents were doing every day?
Those who were in the field offices really did do some limited investigative work. I spoke with Jimmy Young on several occasions because I had to go to New York to work on a special assignment. So anyway, we got a chance to talk with Jimmy Young then. And Jimmy felt good. He wore a suit and tie and he did the job. But it's interesting. They sent me in on special, and I teamed up with another fellow who they sent in from Miami named James Barrow. They didn't send Jimmy Young out to do these things that they were asking Jim Barrow and I to do, because we had the qualifications. We could write the reports. We could contact the informants and everything. And I think the fellows who were not fully qualified, but carried the special agent credentials, felt good about seeing the new breed, so to speak.
So who was the first fully qualified, went to the FBI Academy special agent?
1962, two were hired. One was Aubrey Lewis, and in his class was James Barrow. Jim Barrow had been a clerical employee in the New York office who had the education and had worked for the 3 years that was required, passed the examinations and everything. Aubrey Lewis, I believe, was teaching in Montclair, New Jersey at the time, but Aubrey Lewis was an All-American athlete graduate of Notre Dame University, an all-star football player and track star. So he had that as part of his credentials, so to speak, when the FBI hired him. When they sent him to training school, that was 1962. Ebony magazine had an article on him. Poor Jim Barrow didn't even get his face in the picture, but Aubrey Lewis was the star, so to speak.
Like the poster boy.
The poster boy. He was a nice-looking fellow and the whole 9 yards. So those were the first two. That class went in the summer of 1962. Yours truly and another fellow named John Carey came through the following year. During that whole year, they weren't able to find anyone else, apparently.
That Hoover liked.
That Hoover liked to go through training school. So John Carey and Wayne Davis were the second two to go through the FBI Academy at Quantico, Virginia.
Well, that's so impressive. And I'm sure people have said this to you so many times, but I mean, you were a pioneer. I mean, you came through the FBI at a time when there was a resistance, at least by the director of the FBI, Hoover at the time, to accept African Americans as special agents. And you were there. I mean, you were there with a huge responsibility, not only to represent minorities, but also to get through the academy and show everyone that you could do the work.
Well, you know, Jerry, you can control timing. And had it been 3 years earlier, I probably wouldn't have gotten into the FBI. There I was at the right place at the right time, and I think...
Well, don't be too modest. Why don't we talk about your credentials?
Well,
why was it that they thought Wayne Davis would make a good special agent?
Well, I was in the military. I had gone into the military with a commission, ROTC commission, and I had intended to make the military a career. I decided after a couple of years that I didn't want to make it a career, but I had to stay 3 years anyway. So that gave me the 3 years after college graduate, that gave me the 3 years under what they called then the modified program to qualify for the FBI. And I was assigned to a base in Brooklyn, New York. Part of the personnel staff there was an intelligence specialist, civilian. And he kind of took a liking to me, and he wondered what I was going to do when I left the military, because it was clear at that time that I was not going to make it a career. And I told him I didn't know, and he said, well, did you ever think about the FBI? And of course I had not, because, I didn't have any role models there. I didn't, the FBI was...
Had you seen the Ebony article?
I don't recall whether I'd seen it or not. I don't think I had seen it. I may have been overseas at the time.
I hope I can find that, because I would love to have a link for it.
I can tell you what the issue is. It's September or October or so of 1962, and it's called The Negro in the FBI or something like that.
Okay, I'll take a look for that and see if I can find it, and if I can, I'll put a link on jerrywilliams.com so others can also read that article. I'm sure it's pretty interesting.
It is interesting, because that's, again, you talk about pioneers. That's the one that essentially, and in that issue, they bring into Quantico Leo McLaren. They bring in the Striders, to Quantico just to kind of fluff up the view that the FBI has all these minority agents, when in fact it's kind of part of the propaganda. But anyway, I got through training school. You know, the military background helped. The firearms was not a problem because I had just come out of the military. And after completion of training school, my first assignment was the Detroit office of the FBI. And I got very, very lucky in Detroit. The first thing that stood me in good stead was I pulled a fugitive, and I'm trying to remember whether he was a 76 was a classification or an 88. I don't know if you remember what these classifications are. 76 was parole, probation violation. 88 was unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. But he was armed and dangerous. That was the lead that we got, and I didn't expect to find them, but I went out to one of the suburbs on a lead and managed to locate the guy there and pulled him out and handcuffed him and everything and got him into the back of the car, but I didn't want to return to the office with him sitting in the back of the car behind me.
Oh, wait a minute now. So you're saying that you went out on this lead for a dangerous fugitive all by yourself?
Yes, the all by myself thing kind of comes in because when I got to the office, being a little bit different, being unlike everyone else in the office. So when I say unlike everyone else, I think you know what I mean. And what had happened earlier, a few years earlier, there was a new special agent who came to the office who happened to be Jewish. And he ended up resigning and writing a book and kind of naming some of the agents' names and some of the things that they had done and whatever. And a few people got hurt over that. When I say hurt, you know, the Hoover transferred them out of the division and all of this. So they kind of gave me a wide berth. So yes, I went out by myself. And again, I didn't expect to find anybody there. I was just going out to cover a lead. It may have been a lead from another office. But I went out and the guy was there and I pulled him out and got him handcuffed and into the back of the car and then I radioed the office. You know, we didn't have cell phones in those days. So I radioed the office and explained the situation and said I'd like some help getting this guy back to the office. And 2 or 3 cars with agents in them responded very, very quickly. And then they kind of looked at me with a bit of wonder and newfound respect. And then by the time I got back to the office to get him processed, I found people looking at me, kind of surreptitiously and whispering and,
this guy's okay.
Right. Right. Exactly. And of course, my supervisor called me in and gave me a nice attaboy saying it was a nice piece of work. And then he said, don't you ever do anything stupid like that again. If you think you might be going in to find a fugitive or any other dangerous situation, you put out a call and have other people come and back you up. Don't you do anything like that. And he knew that if I had gotten hurt or if there'd been a misstep or something, he would have been in trouble too. Later on, I managed to assist in a solution of a string of bank robberies, 5 or 6 bank robberies, and I had a good informant and managed to aid in the solution of several bank robberies. They weren't my cases. They weren't going to assign a bank robbery case to a new agent, but I did assist on it and on the solutions and got a incentive award, a cash award from the director, saying, you know, very, very nice work. So that again stood me in very good stead. And in fact, it was kind of interesting because we worked, the bank robbery squad, which I was assigned to, was a bank robbery fugitive squad and major theft squad, worked very closely with the Detroit holdup squad.
With the Detroit Police Department?
Detroit Police Department worked, you know, when there was a bank robbery, it was also just a robbery for the Detroit Police Department. So we worked very closely with them, and the Detroit Police Department holdup squad had a team of black agents. There were 2 guys who were, I'm not sure they were full detectives. I think they were plainclothes officers. After doing a good job in helping on this bank robbery solution, my supervisor started calling FBI headquarters asking for another black agent to be assigned because he wanted his own colored team, which is what he...
They want to replicate the good stuff you were bringing.
Right. And he really wasn't comfortable with me working alone, which I did most of the time. And so that the headquarters calls him back, and they say, you've got a very large minority population there in Detroit. You send us a black agent, we'll send you one back. In other words, you get out there and do some recruiting, and we'll return the favor, so to speak. Anyway, I was there for about 15 or 16 or 17 months, and they never sent another black agent out to work with me.
That time, were your fellow agents in the office a little bit more receptive about working with you?
Extremely so, in fact, because I had very good luck in recruiting a very productive informant. She wasn't much help on the federal cases that I was working, but she was a very good resource on narcotics cases, and we didn't have anything to do with narcotics in those days, but I had a very good friend who was an agent with the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, today's Drug Enforcement Administration, and information that she would dig up for me, I would turn over to him. And I could also task her with assignments. She was a street worker or a prostitute. In fact, she was of help in the bank robbery solutions that I mentioned. Other agents would come to me and say, hey, can you check with your informant on this, that, and the other? And so, yeah, the other agents in the office found me a very, very good resource. That worked out very, very well. I got to be a very popular guy.
Well, that's good to know.
I transferred to the Newark division in 1965, and sometime in 1964, Director Hoover had given an interview to a New York newspaper, the New York Journal American, which has been out of business for quite a number of years. But it was a friendly reporter, and he wanted to demonstrate through this news interview that the FBI had a number of black agents who were doing great work. So he mentioned me in that article, helping in solving bank robbery cases in Detroit. And in the article, he also mentioned the Striders, who apparently had some of the same kind of work done in Los Angeles. So I was going to, at this time, I'm assigned to the Newark division, and I'm going down to in-service. And I was told, pack a suit. Well, I'm just going to in-service. Why do I need to pack a suit? Well, it's our word that the director wants to see you. So I packed the suit, and at some point while I was in the service, I got the word to go up and see the director, and I did. I went up, and on the way to his office, you kind of walk down this long hallway, and there are people scurrying around. Everybody's got a piece of paper, and they're running back and forth. And the last desk that you get to is Helen Gandy. That's his longtime secretary, and she kind of gives you this look. You don't know whether it's a grimace or a grin, but she kind of looks you up and down. And I'm speaking in the present tense because I can remember this like it was yesterday.
I can imagine.
The very last door that you get to is his door. And standing outside of his door is Samuel Noisette, Special Agent Samuel Noisette. But Sam, he didn't carry a gun, I don't believe. I'm pretty sure he didn't. But Sam, like many others through long and loyal service, was given special agent credentials. Sam, by the way, was a great painter, great artist, and worked in oils, and did a very, very nice job in selling some of his paintings. At any rate, I'm headed toward the director's door, and I see Sam. He's standing there, and he's looking at me approaching. Sam is just beaming. It's almost like I was his son. Wow. You know, and I approach him, and I say, Mr. Noisette, good to see you, good to see you. And he says, "Oh, boy," he looks me up and down, and he's just smiling. And again, almost like I was related to him.
Proud to see an actual qualified, went through the academy, actual... Finally. So then he pulls me over to the side, out of eyeshot and out of earshot of anyone else. The smile leaves his face. He has me by the lapels, and he says, "You have anything to write with?" And I didn't think I would need anything to write with. And I said, no, I don't. So he reaches in his pocket, he pulls out one of the black government pens, pulls open my coat and sticks it into my shirt pocket. And he says, "You have anything to write on?" And I didn't have anything to write on. I didn't bring a pad or anything. He pulls out some 3x5 cards and pulls open my jacket again, sticks them in my pocket, pulls my jacket back close, straightens my tie, pats my lapels down. And he says, "Don't let him catch you short." He motions with his head toward the director's door. And he says it again, "Don't let him catch you short." And at that, he knocks on the door, opens it, and announces me. And in I go. But I think this kind of answers your earlier question about whether the black agents who were agents more in name rather than function, how they felt about the new breed. And I met several more much later when a friend of mine was the first black agent who was killed on duty. I went down to the funeral and was a pallbearer and everything. And I met several more black agents then who were essentially messengers and chauffeurs. But again, they were very happy to see myself and several of the other black agents at that time. So that'll give you an idea of their feeling. There was no jealousy, no animosity. It was just, thank God, finally. Pride.
The FBI is doing the right thing.
Absolutely. So how'd the meeting with Hoover go?
Well, when you go in to see Hoover, at least at my level, and of course I'm in my second office now, you don't talk, you listen. And he railed on about this, that, and the other, and he was very upset about Martin Luther King. He had a meeting with Martin Luther King, and he wasn't very happy about the way that meeting had gone. And he railed about that. He did to you? He did to me. One of his statements, it surprised me just a little bit, but it was fact. He said he was a lot lighter in complexion than I thought he would be, than the pictures that I saw. He must have a lot of white blood in him, clearly. And then he went on, and he was very upset because I guess they talked, and I guess when the meeting was winding down, Martin Luther King said to him, "I have this press release that I'm going to give when I leave your office." And Hoover's position was, how on earth could he give a pre-prepared press release when he had no idea what was going to go on in this office? So he didn't like that at all, and he had characterized King earlier as the greatest liar in some verbiage like that. The most notorious liar in the country, I think, was the way he characterized him. And I think that was probably due to King having said that the agents in some of the southern offices where there was a lot of civil rights activity were born and raised essentially in those areas and kind of sympathized with the local police who weren't really enforcing the law that they should have, the way that they should have enforced the law. So he thought that King, he characterized King as the most notorious liar in the country because, a lot of the agents in those offices had come from the North, and they were down there in their second offices, and their kids were in schools, but their origins were in the North. He was very upset with some of King's remarks.
That must have been uncomfortable. I mean, you're in to see the director of the FBI about your work, and he uses the time not to talk about you and the work that you've done in the Bureau, but to go on and on negatively about Martin Luther King.
Well, Jerry, at the time, I just sat there and listened. I really didn't have any feelings about it. I was still enthralled about being in the presence of the director of the FBI. I hadn't asked to be there or anything, and still wondered what I was doing there. I figured it out later on that the reason was that he had given this interview to the New York newspaper and just wanted to see who this guy was that he had mentioned.
So again, another box check.
Another box checked. And that would have been 1965. I think it was 1965. And not too long thereafter, a couple of years or so, I worked on the hijacking squad in Newark. And 1967, I got transferred to Washington Field office. And the reason was, I found out later on again, was that the FBI headquarters had gotten some information that there were going to be disturbances in Washington, D.C., and they wanted some black agents assigned to the office to hopefully get out in front of this thing, get ahead of the curve, and see if information could be surfaced that would demonstrate who would be responsible, etc. So when I got to the Washington Field office, there was already one black agent assigned, a fellow named Alex Porter, who left the bureau not too long thereafter. And then several other black agents came in as their second office.
And so this was all during the Civil Rights Movement.
So Civil Rights and New Left movement, Students for a Democratic Society. It was all of that was handled on the squad that I was assigned to. Most of the black agents who came into the office were assigned to that squad, except one, a fellow named Edwin Woodruff, was assigned to another squad, and Woody ended up being the first black agent killed in the line of duty on a bank robbery case. And the funny thing about it, not funny thing, I had just had coffee with him that morning. You know, when Hoover was alive, you couldn't drink coffee in the office. I think that's changed.
Yeah, I think it's changed too.
But you couldn't drink coffee in the office. So what agents would do is they'd come in, they'd sign in, they'd decide what cases they were going to work, and then their first stop after leaving the office would be to stop at a diner or some favorite place and have coffee for half an hour or 40 minutes or so and kind of discuss the world at large. So I had coffee with Woody, Edwin Woodruff, that morning, and a couple of other guys, Eddie and a fellow named Tony Palmisano. Tony Palmisano had been a clerical employee in the Newark office when I was assigned there, became an agent, and was assigned to Washington Field office. So I knew Tony well, knew him better than Woody. So we'd all had coffee. Then Woody went along his way I think he'd gotten a call about a bank robbery or something, and I went in another direction to cover some leads on my cases. And I went in and conducted an interview, and then when I came back out, there was a lot of traffic on the radio, and the word was for me to get back into the office as soon as possible, which I did, and it wasn't until I got back into the office I found out that Woody had been shot and killed.
By a bank robbery suspect?
Yeah, he was, Billy Austin Bryant had robbed a bank and gone to his ex-wife's apartment, which was in southeast Washington, D.C., not far from where the bank was robbed. And they were no longer married, not together anymore, and Woody and Tony got the word to just go by the wife's house and ex-wife's house and check, just to make sure that he wasn't there. And they did that, and he was standing behind the door when they opened it, when she opened it. And I think they barely got their credentials out when he just pulled the door open and shot both of them, killed them on the spot.
Killed both?
Killed both. Didn't get a chance to draw their weapons or anything. So that was really, really bad news situation.
That had to be very difficult.
It was a very difficult situation. Eddie had two children, a girl and a boy, and just a very, very difficult set of circumstances.
Now, when did you become a supervisor, and what squad were you supervising?
I became a relief supervisor, and on the squad that I was working on in Washington Field office. So, relief supervisors take over when the supervisor is on vacation or or whatever. And so I was a relief supervisor, and it wasn't that long, probably another year and a half. They sent me over to headquarters as a supervisor. When you go to headquarters, then you have the title of supervisor. I would have liked to have stayed in the field office and become a supervisor, but I think they weren't quite ready for that yet. It was a lot easier to kind of let me be a supervisor somewhere else.
So at that point, were you the first African-American supervisor?
No, I was not. Several years earlier, let's see, I went over in December of 1970 with about 7 years of service because I entered on duty in 1963. John Carey, my classmate, who was very skilled and had several degrees. I think he had a master's at that time in computer sciences, and that was ahead of the curve.
Oh, wow, yeah, and in the 60s? I didn't even know they had computers in the 60s.
John was first office Philadelphia, second office Detroit, so he was in the field for probably 3 years before they pulled him back to headquarters. So John was the first black supervisor at FBI headquarters, but his domain was the computer sciences area, and I think he was writing the manual on computer stuff. I don't know exactly what it was or anything. So I was behind him for about, several years.
So as a supervisor at headquarters, you're supervising more so a particular program as opposed to people.
A particular program, and the paperwork from the field offices comes into you. You review it, and if you see something that you think needs to be done, then you go back out and you give instructions. But again, as you indicated a minute ago, more program-oriented than direct supervisory authority.
And what was that program?
It was the squad that I was assigned to in Washington field office, again, was racial matters and New Left matters. It was handled by Division 5 at FBI headquarters, which was the Domestic Intelligence Division. That doesn't exist anymore. Principally racial matters.
Okay. And again, this is during the Civil Rights Movement.
Right.
I've got to ask you this question. You're working for the FBI. You have the director of the FBI who is making derogatory and negative comments about Martin Luther King. Is there any type of divide or struggle or inner turmoil about what the FBI is doing and asking you to do and what's happening outside with the Civil Rights Movement?
Well, not in so many words, I don't think. The job that we had to do in the field office and the job that we had to do at FBI headquarters was essentially to determine if there were elements in the New Left movement or the Civil Rights movement that were problematic, that were sowing seeds of discord. Not so much just investigating civil rights activity as much as looking to see if there was any personnel or people either in the locale who were coming in from outside to stir things up. And doing so, we were very intent on developing sources in the civil rights movement to see if we could, and the New Left movement, to see if we could make that kind of a determination. So that was kind of the way that I looked at things, and I think the way that the other agents who were assigned to those things did as well.
All right. So basically, you were looking to see if there were communist elements or communist attempts to infiltrate the civil rights movement.
Yes, and Hoover's big bugaboo was communism. He saw communists and communism everywhere. As far as he was concerned, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was Martin Luther King's baby, was infiltrated by communists. And consequently, he thought King was influenced by communists. So that really kind of got him against the civil rights movement. But I have to combine that with not just that. I think he was a man of his time. He was born and raised in the District of Columbia, which was essentially a southern city. Hoover also had in mind some people, black people, of good education and accomplishment, whom he thought would make good leaders of the civil rights movement, other than King. One was a judge in New York whose name escapes me now. It may have been Pierce, but I'm not sure, that he thought were moderate and that, in his view, would have made good leaders for the civil rights movement. I think he thought that Roy Wilkins was another. He didn't think that those people leading marches and giving speeches that got people riled up were the right people to be speaking for the civil rights movement.
Strange that Hoover would think that he had the right to make recommendations or suggestions as to who would be the appropriate civil rights leader.
He believed that, no question. And in fact, I think that probably was one of the things that COINTELPRO. Are you familiar with COINTELPRO?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I worked at Division 5.
Let's break that down for everyone. So COINTEL was counterintelligence.
COINTELPRO was counterintelligence program. And that was a program that was designed in Division 5, the division to which I was assigned. My fingerprints aren't on that, by the way. I worked at another part of Division 5.
Okay.
But that was the baby of William Sullivan, who was the director of the division at the time, and that the intent of that program was to, among other things, kind of embarrass King to the degree that he was no longer effective. The view was that if he could be placed in a negative light, then one of the other more moderate black leaders would be able to ease in and take over the civil rights movement and be more moderate about the aims and the progress and the direction that the civil rights movement was making.
So I'm trying to understand, from what you know, what his problem was with the civil rights movement. Was he afraid that it was going to ignite racial unrest, or did he feel that King and his associates were asking for too much too fast? Was he afraid of the communist infiltration?
The latter thing that you just mentioned was, I think, the principal thing. He believed that the communist infiltration and influence of people like King was causing activities and things that would result in violence.
Even though King had a nonviolent mission throughout his time, he talked about nonviolence.
True, but he did in fact have some close advisors who had associations in the Communist Party USA. Okay. Not that they were acting for the CP USA in their activity and relationship with the civil rights movement, but historically they had some association with the Communist Party.
The Communist Party or the Socialist Party?
Communist Party USA, CP USA. And with Hoover, once you were involved with something like that, then you were painted with that brush forever. So that's kind of where he was with that these people with this Communist Party background were influencing King and other civil rights leaders to take a more active stance that was not good for the country. And it was we're talking now about the civil rights movement, but we also have to talk about the New Left movement, Students for a Democratic Society, which ended up kind of being more violent than, they ended up setting bombs and things, resulting in some people getting killed. And I can't say that for the civil rights movement. The people who were killed and injured in the civil rights demonstration were generally those who were set upon by, quote, law enforcement officers, particularly in the South. We're talking late 1960s, early 1970s. And I say early 1970s, very early, because Hoover died in May, I think it was, of 1972. And L. Patrick Gray came in, they put him in as acting director. And that was really when the FBI started making some headway in the recruitment of blacks and other minorities and women.
Definitely women.
Yeah, when Gray came in, he reversed the no women in the special agent position right away. They must have had some women who had applied, because the first two women entered on duty probably, if not weeks, at least a month or two after Gray was in the chair as acting director. And another thing that Gray did was, I was, again, in Division 5, the Domestic Intelligence Division. He said, we need to put a face on minority recruitment. So, FBI headquarters, you get some minorities over here in the administrative division, which was a division which really is responsible for hiring, discipline, budgetary matters, and
kind of like the HR of the FBI.
Back then, it was the most powerful division in the FBI, and so they looked around and they found me. So they said, "Come on over here." So a fellow named Dick Hunzinger was the unit chief in the personnel section, and I had met Dick earlier in another context, and he had me transferred over to the administrative division, and had an agent of Hispanic origin who was also already at FBI headquarters transferred there as well, and we were kind of to put the face on this minority recruitment effort. But that was where I got a chance to look at the files. And that was where I got to see the series of communications between Bobby Kennedy and Hoover, at least Bobby Kennedy's office and Hoover's office, with the AG's office saying, how come you haven't been able to recruit any minorities? And with Hoover's office going back and saying, we just haven't been able to find anybody qualified. And this went back and forth. And the reason I was able to get the files is because now being in the administrative division and having this responsibility to put a face on minority recruitment, I said to myself and to my supervisor, if I'm going to see where we need to go, what we need to do, I need to see where we've been, what we have tried to do. So that gave me license to go back and pull the files. And
so basically this is the time period when you were talking about where Bobby Kennedy was saying to Hoover, we need some minority agents, and he was saying, I can't find any.
Well, let me just correct that just a bit. What he was saying was that you will hire minority agents, and finally this series of communications went back and forth until the AG's office came back and said, okay, you've been telling us you can't find anybody qualified. The next communication you send over here in the next quarter or whenever it was, we want you to identify by name and other information those whom you have surfaced and the reasons that they were not qualified.
Wow, okay.
Hoover.
Accountability.
Hoover may have been a lot of things, but he was not a stupid man. He was not going to get caught lying outright to his boss, the AG. Well, the AG's brother was president, or at least, roughly. So he started to gin up the minority recruitment effort. But that's trying to put it in retrospect. That was when when things started to...
And that's when your appointment came.
Right. That's when they started to be able to find people that they hadn't been able to find.
So can we say that the reason that you're an FBI agent, you owe it all to Bobby Kennedy?
I think so. I think so. He really put the pressure on and wouldn't take no for an answer. It wasn't just the FBI. It was a number of other agencies, but the FBI really was probably the most resistant and probably the most high profile. His hand was forced. Back in the Hoover days, it was very easy to run afoul of the structure. All you had to do was go out on an investigation, and some little old blue-haired lady who you interviewed didn't like the way that you looked, and she would call FBI headquarters, and that would go up the line, and you'd end up getting transferred to some godforsaken location. So it was very, very easy to get in trouble, so to speak, in Hoover's time. And I'd hate to say this, but I would think that he would not have been upset if some of the black agents that he was forced to hire got into a little bit of trouble. So it would have been even easier for you to come afoul. All right, so you're at headquarters working in this the administrative division by now. Right, trying to do the recruitment of more minorities and women also at that time. Yes. And where did you go from there? I worked there, and I got several promotions in the personnel section while I was there. I got promoted to unit chief of the applicant recruitment unit, and all the while I'm still having responsibility for minority recruitment. How did you do? I think we did pretty well as a bureau. One of the responsibilities that I undertook while I was there in the personnel section and kind of responsible for minority recruitment, I would go down to each new special agents class, and I would give a presentation on the need for minority and women as special agents. And what do you think was the issue? Sounds like there was some problem in recruiting, not necessarily on the Bureau's part of trying to reach out, but maybe on the other side of people being interested. I think there were several things. I think that one was exposure, and one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to the new agents classes was that the best recruitment tool we had, as far as I was concerned, was other agents. If I could convince the other agents of the need, agents are out there in the street talking with people. And I felt that they would be a great resource if they found somebody or saw somebody in a teaching job or a bank manager or something like that, a lawyer or an accountant. They were our best recruiting tool, I thought. Well, other than just the numbers, you want more numbers. Could you talk about why it's so important to have a diversified workforce in the FBI? The job of the special agent of the FBI is to conduct the investigations of some probably 200-odd classifications of violations of federal law. When I was in, I think it was 180 different classifications. Now with terrorism, etc., we have probably over 200. And the FBI agents are the people who are out there on the street talking to people, developing sources of information, being that first line of people who probably have never met an FBI agent. And with this country being as diverse as it is, my feeling is that that's reason enough for the FBI special agent position to reflect the diversity in this country. That's the end of the interview and to my tribute to honor the memory of Special Agent Wayne Davis. At jerrywilliams.com, you'll find many photos of Wayne during his remarkable career. There's a link to that Ebony article about the Negro in the FBI, and a link to updated
FBI Special Agent Diversity Statistics. And there's a copy of Wayne Davis's obituary. I hope you'll share the episode with your friends, family, and associates. If they're not sure how to listen to a podcast, have them read the post on my website, How to Listen to a Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to FBI Retired Case File Review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. I want to welcome new listeners and invite you to join my reader team. This podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my monthly email, I keep you up to date on the FBI in books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, which is a colorful list of more than 50 books about the FBI written by the FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoir. You can join my reader team on my website or use the link in your podcast app's description of this episode. I would also love it if you checked out the link for my books in your podcast app's description of this episode. My nonfiction books, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, which goes through 20 cliches and misconceptions about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. And then there's the companion book, FBI Word Search Puzzles, Fun for Armchair Detectives. My FBI Philadelphia Corruption Squad crime series features flawed female FBI agent Carrie Wheeler in Pay to Play and Greedy Givers. All of my books are available wherever books are sold as ebooks, print books, and audiobooks. If you've already picked up copies of my books, please consider leaving a review. Reviews help readers find good books. Thank you for listening to the very end, and I hope you come back again for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.